Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast exploring storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, theater, among other areas of the arts. I want to welcome back to the show Lora Stocker, who is a graphic designer, illustrator, and artist. Her broad client roster includes mom and pop businesses, nonprofits, national and international brands, Turner Classic Movies, and she is also a board member at the Ava Gardner Museum. Lora, welcome back. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Robert. I've really enjoyed our last conversation, so I'm looking forward to chatting with you again about some Ava Gardner films.
Me too. And this was one I hadn't seen before, and it's a really interesting and unique film. But I wanted to ask you off the top, because I believe you had mentioned this was a favorite of yours with her. What makes this a favorite? Why is this a favorite to you?
Oh, well, I'm prepared to talk for easily an hour about why it's one of my favorites. We'll see how long our conversation goes. But I just feel like this is such an unusual film. It's unusual in her body of work, and it's unusual for the time in which it was made. It is a fantasy, it's a romance, it's kind of got time travel in it. It's very moody, it's incredibly artistic. It has a real sensibility to artistic practices, to literature, to lots of things that I personally love that fall into my background as an artist and designer and lover of art history and all of that. And it's incredibly intentional. Everything about it, you can watch it endless, no matter how many times you watch it. And I happened to rewatch it again this morning in anticipation of our talk. I like to have one good last viewing right before I do a podcast to make sure I've got it all in my mind. But I caught more things, and I've got like endless pages of notes.
Yeah, I saw on Instagram. I was like, that was like a book report,
not that I'll even use them, but really I write down things for myself because I love this movie. I feel like I'm a bit of a champion for it. Not that other people don't love it too, but in the US, it's a little more obscure of her body of work. People don't automatically know it. So I'm always kind of doing the rally cry for it. But I just love how purposeful it was. The director, writer, producer, Albert Lewin, who was behind this film, it was very much his voice, his vision. And he saw it through from the first frame to the last frame, to the set design, to the dialogue, to the cinematography, to the costumes, down to the special effects and everything. And I just find it a very rewarding film to rewatch. I love lots of movies that I can see like once, and it's like, I love that movie, but I don't need to see it again. This is a movie I go back to. And like I said, every time I watch it, I find more things. And when I talk to people about it who've seen it once or a gazillion times, they help me discover new things about it. So I just love that about it.
Well, it's such a, it's a surrealist film. I mean, even I know Martin Scorsese loves this movie, and he said something along the lines of, it's like the whole film is like a dream. I mean, if you try to make sense of it, you're going to be bashing your head against the wall, because dreams rarely make sense. But I think the essence of it really comes through. But it's actually not really a Hollywood film. I mean, it's a British film, but MGM distributed it, I believe. Is that, I don't know if you know.
Yes, so it was Albert Lewin was someone who had quite a kind of film or film adjacent pedigree. He was highly educated, had a background. He went to Harvard. He came from a very humble working class Jewish American background on the East Coast in New York, and then he ended up going to Harvard, studied literature. He was a film critic. He worked in and out of the film industry in various capacities, worked with Irvin Thalberg, worked at Paramount, just kind of was a script reader, was in production, just had all kinds of things, all kinds of experiences in and around the film business. So he really picked up a lot by the time he actually got to make a movie in the, kind of in the early to mid 40s. And he only made 6 movies, and they're all very much his vision. It's well worth seeking out his body of work and watching it, because it's incredibly unique. Very innovative and original. Even if you don't necessarily like the films, they're worth watching because of just how daring they really were. And so he wanted to make this movie. This was the first time he did his an original screenplay. He's probably best known for doing Dorian Gray in 45. That's kind of his big picture. Most people know him by that. But this was the first time he was working in, I believe the first time he was working in color, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And also this was his first original screenplay. And when he presented it to his people that he was, working with, I don't know for sure if he was in a contractual relationship with MGM, but he had the opportunity to make this movie, and MGM was kind of like, this is a little too avant-garde for our brand. And so he ended up going over to Europe, and he worked with Romulus Films to produce this movie.
That's right.
And but he cut a deal with MGM, and he was able to get Ava Gardner as a loan out to do the film because he felt like she was the perfect embodiment of how he envisioned Pandora. And when you see the movie, I agree with him.
Oh, for sure.
Just as an Ava fan, I think she's incredibly well suited to this role, and I think she really brought a lot to it, which we'll get to, I'm sure. But that's how it worked. Romulus, he went to Europe, he made the film, and what a blessing, because in Europe, he was not held to the confines or the supervision of the studio. He could really explore all the facets of this fantastical idea and concept that he had. He could shoot on location, and the location is pivotal to the movie. He could work with a wonderful costume designer, Beatrice Dawson, who did really interesting things with Ava's wardrobe in this film, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. So he got to work with Jack Cardiff, who was working primarily at the time. So, I mean, it was perfect. And then MGM, in addition to doing, loaning Ava out, they had the release rights. Now, something that's a little interesting that I discovered working on a project with the museum and exploring this film was that Ava did 3 pictures in 1951, My Forbidden Past, Showboat, and Pandora. Pandora was released in Europe earlier in the year. It was held in the US to be released after Showboat. So American audiences first got to see glorious Ava Gardner in full Technicolor in Showboat before they got to see her in Pandora. In Europe, it's reversed. And this film has a very European sensibility to it, and it's revered in Europe. I think it's taken a little longer for American audiences to fully embrace it. And I think with this recent re-release in 2020 by Cohen Media and restoration of the film, that it's finding its new audience, and people are seeing what a treasure it is of a movie.
Well, the Technicolor is like breathtaking, because it's been restored a couple of times, but the recent one is just like, they look like paintings. I mean, I know Jack Cardiff was incredible with his use of color. I love one of his films he did with Hitchcock, Under Capricorn, which is not very well known, but also is the use of Technicolor is brilliant. And Pandora, Ava Gardner is playing a woman here who James Mason character describes her as, a woman that not just some men, all men desire. And
I think they do, and all women do too.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't not desire. I mean, she was stunning, and we talked about that a little bit, I think, in our last episode that we did together on Night of the Iguana. But, her beauty is an entry point for a lot of people who discover her work, and then they're rewarded by her performance and her talent. And what she's able to bring in terms of character development, interpretation. And this film is no exception to that. What is really special, one of the special things about this film to me is, again, the masterful work of Jack Cardiff, who, for some of your viewers who may not know, he worked frequently early in his cinematography career with Powell and Pressburger. So he made The Red Shoes, Black Narcissus, films that are kind of like the ultimate of early Technicolor. And he was trained to use Technicolor. He was truly a master of it. And this movie, in my opinion, having seen most of her body of work, and she's wonderful in so many films and beautiful in so many films, I don't know that anyone captured her more beautifully than the combination of Lewin and Cardiff did.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, she's just
especially,
breathtaking. Like,
it
you're
really
just like,
is.
it's like I was like losing the plot at a certain point because I'm just looking at her, you know. It's like it's just but that was also part of the character, you know, was someone who was so breathtaking that all these men were falling madly in love with. But she's such a unique actor, and I just reviewed 7 Days in May, which she's in. And what's interesting about her is that she reminds me of not that anyone was trying to copy one another, but she reminds me of if you watch Steve McQueen in movies, he's always doing so little, yet so much is happening at the same time. It's so subtle, and she's a similar actor. I mean, I feel like she's doing so little to the point where she's almost daring to do nothing, you know, but and she's bold enough to risk it being flat. I'm not saying it's flat, but it's so small, and but yet there's so much that is being conveyed, particularly at the end. I thought when her and James Mason are, you know, now she knows everything that has happened, that, you know, about the fact that she's the woman in the story of the Flying Dutchman, and, you know, she's come back through this Pandora, which, I mean, for anyone who hasn't seen it, I know that sounds weird, but again, it's surrealist. And this, when they say that they love each other, and just the way she says to him, if only we had a week, if only we had a month left, like I mean, it's so captivating. I mean, I was even thinking, yes, you know, why does she have to die? They should have all this time together. But again, it goes to the heart of the film, which was that their love is timeless. It exists outside of time. So dying, you know, on Earth is not really that big of a deal, because they're going to be together in some way, shape, or form for eternity. But you know, it's really interesting to me how little she does, yet so much is happening in her eyes, in her expressions. Is that your experience with her?
Yeah,
acting?
yeah, I think you've hit on a couple things, and I really like the McQueen comparison. I've not thought about that specifically, but I think of McQueen, and I just recently, you know, have been rewatching a few of his films, and you know, he was somebody who used his hands a lot, but very subtly. You know, he would fidget. And he did that. He actually, I read not too long ago, and I don't know, I haven't substantiated it any further, but that he would do that to kind of capture the audience's eye and attention.
Yeah, he's a bit
away
of a
from his scene partner, you know,
yeah, exactly.
Yul Brynner in particular. But
that's right.
But he would fidget and mess with his hat and kind of mess with buttons and do a little thing, and he does. He really does.
Yeah.
Ava, there's a couple things that I'll touch on. One is kind of something along those lines. Ava's somebody who she seemed to have a very good ownership of her body and her movement. She, again, was not trained in any way, shape, or form, had no background in dance and music and all that. What she learned on the job, working, you know, through the MGM school a little bit. And then just tapping into her own natural abilities. I think that her body of work and her performances read very modern, because they aren't over articulated, aren't overacted.
Yeah, that's right.
There is, like you said, a subtlety to it that to me rings very true to natural human interaction. I use a lot of gestures, as I notice when I'm doing a Zoom recording. I have to watch my, like, I'm moving too much. But you know, when I'm also nervous or in some setting where I'm not very comfortable, my body language is a lot more contained and confined. And she uses that. I don't know if that was intentional. I do know that she thought a lot about her characters, and as she learned more and worked with other actors, particularly working with Gregory Peck and forming a strong friendship with him, she picked up things from other people. Gregory Peck was someone who did meticulous notes about characterization and wrote within his script and did all that. And she learned that from him and started doing that. So in a lot of the scripts that we have in the archives at the museum, she'll have her notes or
Oh, wow.
things that she's thinking about of on a character, or ways that she's, you know, I don't know whether it's her changing the dialogue or working with the script writer and director to change certain, you know, that's the case for our script of 7 Days in May, how some of those things changed over the course of shooting. But, you know, she's someone, as you watch her work in multiple repeats, as I have to do often and enjoy doing, you do start to pick up on, this little gesture that she did with her shoulder, or the way that she holds her hands. And that scene in particular, where the culmination of their romance in Pandora, and she's fully understanding who she is, or who she may be, and how they've been searching for each other throughout time, and great distances. And that it doesn't matter, like you said, if they're able to live 1,000 years or a single minute, the love is going to last. There's a great, if you watch it, the way she holds her hands, they start out a little tense and then they relax. And again, I don't know how intentional that was, but it's highly effective, and it feels very natural. It feels, like I said, it's a modern, because she isn't so again, stylized in the way that a lot of her contemporaries would have been, contemporaries who I love their films, love their work, but her work really does stand out to me because it has this naturalistic element to it. This earthy is used a lot for her, and I think that's an appropriate description. But she is just a very intuitive actress, and you feel as though she's living the scene, that she's working through it in the moment, in reality of, you know, of the confines of that space.
She doesn't plan anything, which again is really remarkable, and I don't think people have given her enough credit about that. You know, I think just from what I know about her, you don't hear much about her as an actor, whereas someone like McQueen, people always talk about that, how he did so little. He designed his performances that way. You know, for various reasons, but you don't hear people talking about Ava in that way, which is a shame. But one thing that also really dawned on me was that in this film we have, well, how many men? Was it 4 men who, like, you know, truly fall for her? We have the race car driver, the bullfighter, then of course James Mason, and the man at the beginning who kills himself. Right when she's playing the piano.
And you have a mysterious man from Indiana who sends her marshmallows. Even
off camera. But wait, you know, it's interesting. It's like how art imitates life, because these things happen to her. Like later on, George C. Scott was abusive and controlling, and actually, you know, beat her up, and you know, Sinatra put his head in an oven, I think, you know, and so she had these tumultuous affairs. Howard Hughes, you know, didn't he like have FBI following her? He was obsessed.
He's an interesting character. He was in and out of her life for about 20 years or so. And she said they never had anything romantic. He wanted her to be, but you know, if you read about Howard Hughes, he wanted to marry everybody.
That's true.
He was always seemed to have a wedding ring in his pocket, ready to pop the question. And I think he was obsessed with her, enamored by her, and she was someone who never wanted to be possessed. And I think that's a through line that helps this character resonate so true, because those of us who do know about her personal life, even if you know about it casually, which most people do know at least her connection to Sinatra, you know, they understand that she was somebody who was considered one of the most beautiful women in the world, if not the most beautiful woman in the world. And men were totally head over heels for her all the time. And that happened on this production. Mario Cabré,
I read that,
the bullfighter. He, you know, she admits they had at least a one-night dalliance of sorts, as she put it, kind of in a night filled with dancing and alcohol. she woke up the next morning like, oh, what did I do?
Yeah, she said he was a pain in the ass, apparently.
And he became obsessed with her. He was also star hungry and he wanted to be a star. He wanted to be a celebrity, and he capitalized on that and really, really, you read about it now and you're like, oh my God, could they not have gotten another actor? But he wrote a book of poetry about her, about how they had this, and he spoke at like the embassy in London when they were going back to London to do some additional shooting for the film, because it was largely shot on location in Spain. And but he like read his poetry and confessed his love for her and basically said, our love is eternal. And she was like, can you please get rid of this guy? So this happened to her in real life on this production where the movie is about. And one thing I kind of forgot to say a second ago, and I don't want to sidetrack, but I do want to mention it before I forget it. You mentioned 7 Days in May, and you and I talked about Night of the Iguana, and I know you've been exploring other parts of her filmography over the last year or so. With this exception of this film, where she truly is the female lead, in a lot of her films, she may be the female lead or she may be the secondary lead. Or she may be the only female in the cast, like 7 Days. The power of her ability as an actor and the screen presence that she brought, she could be on screen for, in 7 Days in May, she's in 3 scenes.
Right.
She's on screen for 30 minutes. In this movie, she's on screen most of the time, but in all of those movies, the common thread is that when she's not on screen, you're wondering where she is.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The characters within the movie, the action within the movie, you take The Killers, for example. I mean, she's not on screen very long, but the whole movie is where is she? How can we find her? What is she doing? She's driving the action. She's motivating the action. And I think that's a testament to her allure and her appeal as a star and a presence. That she has the gravitas in just a few scenes, a few pages to convey that and be always be present even when she's not in the room. And in Pandora, you feel that even in the scenes where she's not in the scene, or she's in this flashback within the flashback of when James Mason's character is remembering his experience.
Oh yeah, she's just lying
Flying Dutchman.
Lying on the bed dead.
Yeah, she's dead, but she's so present, even though she's not alive. And I think that's just a real testament to her skill and what she was able to bring to these roles, and Pandora being no exception to that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And what I like so much about that flashback with James Mason is that, and you can say this about all the men, was that they all fell so deeply in love with her to the point where they all turn to violence in some way, shape, or form. James Mason kills her. The man at the beginning when she's playing the piano, he kills himself. The bullfighter kills James Mason. Well, he thinks he does. That's a whole other. And he kills the dog. Only the race car driver was one who didn't go to those lengths. But he also threw his car off the cliff for her when she said, "Well, if you really love me, what could you do to sacrifice? You have to sacrifice something." And so he throws his car off the cliff, and so they turn to violence or aggression in some way, shape, or form, and they all do things which are violent, not necessarily violent, sorry, dangerous jobs. You got the bullfighter, and then you've got the race car driver. So it's interesting to me that this story, which I think ultimately even though it can be difficult to watch in some ways, there is a real simplicity to what they're saying about love and true love and spirituality and soulmates, and that if one really loves someone, then they, like in James Mason's case, then he or she should have to earn it in some way. and that if you suddenly, in his case, become cynical and negative, you see that after he kills her, he's, and he's in court and they sentence him to death. He says, there is no God. She was faithless. And he says, no women are faithful, so he turns totally sexist, totally angry, and so he has to pay for it. And so how does he pay for it? He's sent to the seas, the Flying Dutchman, until doomsday, unless he can find a woman who will die for him. And he can only find her every 7 years when he has 6 months, and he can go to land for 6 months and try to find her. And if he can't, he's back out into the ocean. And so he describes the ocean, the seas, as being, he compares it to hell, basically. And he has to sit with the regret. This dream comes to him, this voice saying, she was faithful, like she didn't cheat on you. And so he has to redeem himself, and he doesn't. I think we do take a lot of things for granted in life, our relationships and what we have, and we don't really know. And he didn't really know how lucky he was, and so this journey he has to go on in order to find her, and then he does. But it's literally the same woman who comes back in another body. Mm-hmm. He has to go through with this. So to me, that was what was so fascinating, this element of soulmates and love. I mean, you can truly fall for someone, and it's beyond words. I mean, you even see that with her. She doesn't know that she's, in this case, it's obviously explained, because she doesn't know that she's actually I suppose it's like a reincarnation of this woman who from centuries ago. And as she's falling in love with him, she doesn't understand why. And I think often in life, we don't understand why, which makes me think about this element of, soulmates, past lives. Why do we deeply connect or understand someone? You can never explain that, whether your love with this person lasts or doesn't last in life, or whether it's timeless, you could never really explain why you could be so truly in love. And she can't for him. She says, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. And that's when the narrator at the beginning, who finds the Flying Dutchman's papers and the story, gives it to her, and it all comes together. I felt that's really what it was about to me. Was that your experience, or did you see it another way?
No, I think you've hit on a lot of it. There's a quote in the movie, and I'm trying to remember exactly how it goes. I may have it. They have it on one of my notes somewhere. But oh yeah, it's Jeffrey says that. Jeffrey is the narrator character.
Yeah.
And he breaks the wall and talks to you as the audience, which is really, again, a surrealist.
Yeah, which is and it's also it's a very theatrical advice,
yes,
Shakespeare,
so.
theater. They've done it in film as well. Woody Allen did it, Ingmar Bergman, but here, it's beautifully done in this film as well.
It's really seamless and really effective in this, and adds to the surrealism to it, I think. But the line is, the measure of love is what someone is willing to give up for it.
Right.
I think that is so, that is, if there's a theme to the movie, it's that. Mm-hmm. And, part of what, and there's so many things we can talk about, in so many ways we can approach it, but I do like what you're getting at. And that is that they're both searching. The Dutchman is on a quest to find a way to end his endless purgatory. Right. He wants his life to end. He's exhausted, he's tired, and all that. And when he realizes he's met the person that will do that for him, he asks her, "What are you willing to give up for me?" And she said, "Well, I'd give up my life without a moment's hesitation." Yeah. Right. And he realizes that now he loves her, and he loves the Pandora of now. It not a memory of his wife, but the Pandora of now. And she asks him the same question, "What would you give up for me?" And he says, "My salvation." Now, she doesn't know what that means. She doesn't know the depth of that at that moment.
That's a good point.
But she says, "Well, that's even greater than life." And in the, as the story's told, it's always said that he is looking for someone who is willing to give up her life for him, not that that person has to. And what's interesting is that the movie culminates with both of them giving up their physical being for something beyond, whatever that is. And the film does not claim to be one religious practice or another.
No, not at all.
The film dives into legend, mythology, Greek mythology, Celtic mythology, both kind of mystical fantasy, they talk about gypsies and do, psychic readings and all of that within the confines of that time and that place. But there's no, and then there is Christianity. There's crosses in the background, in the hospital scenes, there's nuns, all of this. So it's kind of an amalgamation of all types of religious practices.
That's good. Yeah, that's true.
And then this otherworldly, supernatural time travel thing.
Yes.
But the common thread through all of those is love. And love is, if there's a religion of the movie, it's the religion of love. And it's all explorations of love. It's jealousy. It's a fatherly relationship, which Jeffrey, the narrator, has with Pandora. There's the sexual variations of jealousy, obsession, passion, attraction, not understanding, being drawn to someone without totally comprehending why, and it being instantaneous. Because when Pandora first meets Hendrik van der Zee in her present world, which is set in 1930, she is immediate. She sees him and she almost gasps because it's breathless. And it's just a really interesting exploration of the types of love. And then there's kind of a sisterly dynamic between Ava's character and Jeffrey's niece, Janet, and the relationships of male friendship and female friendship. So of a loving friendship. And it's so interesting and so layered in all the ways that Lewin is able to explore that theme. And throughout all of it, it's, what are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up a daughter figure? Are you willing to give up someone you love? In the case of Janet, she's obsessed with Stephen. She wants to be his wife, but she ultimately loves him enough to realize that he wants Pandora, and she's willing to give him up. So even the secondary characters are willing to sacrifice and give up. Where it becomes more meaningful for Pandora's character and for James Mason's character is that it becomes an ultimate sacrifice. It becomes life and salvation. The other thing, yes, Reggie at the beginning kills himself, but he was clearly a troubled person. And one of the things that we can get into a little bit is that, I've read a lot of the reviews that were written about this film in the States at the time it was released. Most of those critics were male, if not all of them were male. And they felt that she was, petulant and callous and all this sorts of things, they read into how dare she reject all these men and what's her problem. And even some contemporary male viewers might read it that way. Hopefully, I don't think you do, which yay, good for you.
And I really saw it the opposite way. I was like, what is their problem?
But even before she meets Hendrik van der Zee, and starts James Mason's character, and starts this kind of, she transforms after their meeting in a lot of ways, softens, becomes more accepting and a little bit more understanding. But even before that, she's telling Reggie, you don't want to be with me. I'm not right for you. You're not right for me. Go be happy elsewhere. She is giving these men an out. She's telling Stephen, you don't want me. You want your racing car, and Janet would be better for you, not me. She is always, as a woman, as a modern woman, I find these men so infuriating.
Oh no, me too. I did as well.
Go away.
It's that line between love and infatuation, right?
And possession.
Yeah, exactly.
They want to own her. They view her as as something to put on a pedestal. Even Mario Cabré, as he comes back as a bullfighter, he wants, I will marry you in the biggest church, and you'll be my queen or whatever. And she wants a love that is pure and true and reciprocal and all-consuming, in the sense that she wants to be with somebody who she wants to be with, who wants to be with her. She wants that equitable kind of dynamic, and she's not getting it with any of these people. So she's searching and longing for that. And she gets it with James Mason the minute they lock eyes.
Yeah.
And she knows it. And and that is also so contemporary to me. Like, wow, Albert Lewin, you're thinking about these things and exploring these topics, and this giving a female character the opportunity to express this disdain for these men, but still being, kind to them. She's kind to every one of them. She gives them an out and explains to them why it wouldn't work, and you need to go, I'm not right for you, whatever. She's telling them this and trying to let them down easy, yet they persist in their desires to possess her. But she perseveres and continues to look for what's right for her. And she ultimately finds it, and then is so consumed by it in such a, really, oddly enough, a healthy way. They're right. They're truly right for each other. They bring out the glow. I mean, they glow when they see each other. They really do. And when they're together, and that, and that's the fulfillment. And once fulfilled, I'm good. I'm content. I've found this thing that I've been looking for always. I found it, and you found it in me. And so it doesn't matter what happens tomorrow. Doesn't matter what happens in 5 minutes, because we found it now and we're in the present of it now. And that's just really, those are interesting, really innovative things to be talking about in 1950-51 when this movie was made.
That's all, really, really well said. And I thought that too, because you didn't often see men then, and this is something that we're just seeing, or giving more female directors opportunities, or writers. They will be able to maybe point out certain flaws in specific type of men that us males don't always see, and which in this case is that these men are being basically rejected, and how they turn to violence in some way, shape. I'm not saying all men do that, but it is generally common often that it because men are taught to not cry, to not show emotion, to only be in touch with anger often. When men feel pain or sadness, they don't know what to do with it, and then that's why you hear these awful stories of men killing women and hurting women and all this kind of these terrible things. And you see that in this film, which I thought was interesting from a male writer and director, showing like the bullfighter especially. Like you see right away he's she's engaged, and he's like, and she talks about the race car driver being brave, and he's like, I'll show you bravery, and he goes out with the and he's takes the bull out, he's trying to impress her, like he's totally obnoxious. And it's a side of men in films that we don't see often enough. So you're right, I thought to see that here in the early 50s was quite something. And you brought up a good point, because I after the end of the film, I was like, well, what did Mason really sacrifice? But it's true, because he was willing to say, well, I don't want to have this woman die for me, and I'm just I don't because he is making everything about himself up until this point. He kills her because he thinks she cheats on him. He wants to die because of the conditions he's in. He's trying to find the woman who will die for him, and then finally he does, and then he's thinking about her now. He's like, well, she shouldn't have to die for me. So he really learns that lesson. I mean, he has that growth, which takes centuries in this case, which is interesting, because anything in life takes time. Often stories are very simplistic in the way people change or condensed, but in this case, here's this guy who like had to go through hell literally in order to change the way he looks at things.
What you were saying about his learning over the centuries of how to be a better person and how to find, another aspect of love that this movie explores is redemption.
Yes, yeah.
His redemption. That's really the main arc of his character is redemption. And going through that journey and it taking centuries and 6 months.
Right.
But the scene where he first encounters Pandora, she's gone, she's taken off all her clothes on the beach, dived in the ocean and gone out to taken a long swim out to his yacht to meet him. And it's almost like she emerges re-sanctified, almost like a baptism, coming out of the water nude.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Which is really interesting thing to think about, but I digress. She gets on the ship, she meets him, and he's in the process of creating this painting.
Right.
Painting, you learn later, he's painting a vision of his wife,
right.
His former wife, who is identical to Pandora, who may or may not be Pandora reincarnated. I think she is, but they have this interaction, and she can't understand, how do you know what I look like? And she, he says, he basically tells her, well, you're discontent. You have discontent.
Yeah, he hits some sore spots.
Because you're showing, fury and volatility are signs of discontent. And that's what you're expressing. And she goes, well, oh yeah, let me destroy your painting. And she does this. And then she looks at him thinking he's going to react like all of these other men that she's experienced and been with have reacted, in anger and frustration. And yet he stands there stoic and calm. And she says, are you not angry? Are you not mad? And he goes, no, I stopped being mad and angry long ago.
Right.
So
right.
You learn that and in that moment, it calms her, and she stops being angry and mad, and her character begins to change. And the way that she interacts with the scene right before this was the scene you referenced earlier, where she and Stephen had driven his race car up to the top of the mountain, and she basically said, would you give up? What do you love most in this world? And he says, well, my car and you. And she said, well, will you give it up for me? If so, push it off into the ocean. And he does. And then she agrees to marry Stephen if he still wants to, which he says he does. And then she has this interaction on the boat with James Mason, and she is met with his calm, stoic, but accepting, like, you needed to just express yourself, Pandora, and get angry. And I understand that, but I'm past the point of anger. And that calms her. And then in the next moment, the next scene, you learn that she has told Stephen, go get your boat up from the ocean, or your car up from the ocean, go fix it, do your race. I'm not going to require that of you anymore. So in that one interaction, her character is already changing, and she's already, redeeming herself too, which is just kind of an interesting thing, the way that the two characters grow. James, within this little 6-month period, that he grows to realize that the thing that he's been searching this entire time for, he's willing to sacrifice because of love. And she realizes all the ways that the people that have been infatuated with her, that has been detrimental to them. Even though she always tried to get them to go away, she sees the extreme nature of it, and she lets Stephen tells him, go get your car back, be in this race. She's calm later when Janet confronts her out of jealousy because Janet's infatuated with Stephen.
That's a great moment.
She stays calm, and she tells Stephen, go comfort Janet, be sweet to her. And then later when Janet apologizes, she says, don't worry about it, and it's kind to them. And so her character is going through a condensed version of it, but this same kind of arc of redemption, which is just really interesting to see how those two characters interact.
yes, because her character is in the beginning a very has a lot of flaws. I mean, like as we all do, but they really show her flaws, particularly the fact that this man killed himself, and she says she was relieved. Like, I mean, she doesn't seem to have any feeling for anyone. Even the fact that she tells this guy to throw his car off a cliff for her, it almost feels, as you're getting to know her, like she's toying with them, she's playing games with them, and as she says later, it's only because out of a lack of love that she's putting that into things that are destructive. You know, I mean, she was kind and upfront, like as you said, but she also sort of was cool and distant and cruel. And Mason is the one who in the boat says that to her, like along those lines, and that's when she gets mad because it hits a sore spot, and she takes the brush and you know, tears up her face. And what I found interesting was that later on he restores the painting, right? So it's like she went away from the image of her, of who she was, and then by the end of the film, it's basically, it's, you know, he couldn't see her, but now he can see her, and he restores the painting, you know, which I found really fascinating.
Yeah, me too. I think the character trait that she is lacking at the beginning is empathy. And I think that's what her interactions with him help restore it, or spark, and you know, it sparks anew in her. You know, I think, like we were talking earlier, I think the men in the beginning of the movie, you know, I don't read it as callous. I read it as just discontent and frustration and annoyance. And it's like, here we go again with this guy that is, you know, every time I see him, he's threatening suicide, he's drunk, he's doing all of these things, he's making a scene. I'm so tired of this. And he's followed me to the coast, to this isolated coast of Spain. I cannot.
Yeah, you can see why she was relieved that he died.
Yeah. And so, you know, so Janet sees that as, oh my God, you heartless woman.
Right.
And she's saying, you know, you don't know what I've been putting up with. You don't know what I've dealt with. Even so, though, I think that she gets more empathetic as the film goes on. I think that she starts to see, like I said, you know, Stephen, you know, you gave this thing up to me for me that you love so much. Go get the car, bring it back, fix it up. And also, while you're fixing it up, I'm going to go hang with James Mason, get to know him a little bit. That's a good distraction too. But the same with Mario's character, Montalvo, I think was his name, Montalva. But she's also with him, like, you know, you and I'm made a commitment to this other person. It's not you, you know, go live your life and do your thing and don't worry about me. There are other women that you can be with that want to be with you. I don't, you know, and she's more and more empathetic with each person, and she feels genuine sorrow when Mario character dies. He confesses to her what he tried to do to James Mason, tried to kill him, but she also, you can tell she feels sympathy at his passing, that it's come to this. And so I think that's, again, part of her kind of redemptive arc is getting that last component of, you know, a whole person, that other measure of love, empathy and sympathy and those kinds of feelings, and being able to express those in the moment. Those interactions with Hendrik sparked that back in her, I think.
Well, one thing I had thought after watching the film was that this woman who centuries ago was killed, we don't see what happens to her soul afterwards. We see what happens with Mason and the journey he needs to go on to restore himself. But perhaps in a way we see the journey she has to go through here and now as Pandora on Earth, where without, you know, love in her life, she's become, you know, cool and detached, and has a lot of frustration with all these various people who are wrong for her or express themselves in the wrong way. One thing I thought was perhaps because he describes her as being totally innocent. So I thought, well, maybe it's more of the fact that even though you know her soul was just, you know, angelic, that she wouldn't become, you know, awful or terrible in another life. Because I mean, he very much becomes quite jaded and angry, and you know, and so his journey. But now that I'm talking about it out loud, I think it was more that we see more of her journey just here on Earth, whereas his whole journey is out in the seas. It's that whole story, and yeah, I mean, there's more of a journey, the lessons he learns. But that's a good point, because my initial thought was, well, it seemed like this was more James Mason's story, and I felt as though we didn't get to see enough of what had happened to the soul and now coming back to life. But I don't really think, I mean, it's not supposed to make sense, obviously, because it's surreal. But I think we saw a lot of her, you know, on the salt of the earth, basically, where she has to put up with a lot of frustration and then to be restored back together. I don't know if that's what you also thought.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a lot of similar things that I've thought through viewing this film a few times. In those flashback scenes with James Mason, where he's telling his story, his origin story, if you will. He talks about the attributes of his wife and talks about how she was innocent and kind and good and loved me and I loved her, and the reciprocal elements of it and all of that, not to mention her beauty. But her beauty, and over time, you know, his character was cold and mean and brutal. Like you said, he kills her because he thinks she's had an affair, and then this voice, be it God, be it something else, tells him, you know, once he's been released, you know, sort of mysteriously released from prison and back on his vessel, that she was not, she did not have an affair. She did not violate the bonds of their marriage or betray him in any way. And in fact, she was being kind and sympathetic to someone, and in some way, shape, or form did an act of kindness, generosity. It doesn't explain what that is, but it alludes to it. And that he misconstrued that as something romantic. And you look at, it's like, you know, the way his character was mean and volatile and filled with fury, is there's parts of that is in Pandora when they meet. You know, with the painting, with the way that she requires these elements of sacrifice, not to the degree of murder, but someone does die for her. Multiple people die for her. And then over the course of her redemptive arc, it's like she returns to the character and the attributes that his wife displayed.
Exactly.
So, you know, that's kind of, I think that's kind of where you're headed with that, and where my mind's going with it. But it's like, she, you know, she's been searching, she's been long, and you know, her character, we understand that it's she's a nightclub singer of some fame, and she's traveled all over the world, and she's traveled all over Europe, and she's ended up in this, you know, little enclave of incredibly wealthy people who you don't quite know how they have all the money they do, living in, you know, in this little small group of
in Spain
expats of some kind that are, you know, together in this beautiful coastal town in Spain. And, but, you know, in that she's, you know, there's a sense of decadence. There's this sense of, you know, wealth and kind of, you know, we'll just party on the beach and let our skirts fly up, and just kind of wildness to it. And all we're thinking about is, you know, robbing from antiquity and having a big, you know, having a race on the beach where we break a speed record. I mean, that's the big action sequence of the film. You know, it's not anything of substance.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Really, and and it's follies of the rich and the decadent. And
yes.
and that's kind of an interesting way to think about it, because, you know, one of the things that James Mason says about his deceased wife is that I'd come back to her with jewels and she'd love it, you know, and that kind of thing. But, you know, that's not what wins Pandora in the modern day.
That's a good point.
It's just the love and the sacrifice and the interactions and what's said and not said in the moments that they share together. And she comes back to being what would have, you know, the wife would have been in the past. She, as I said, you know, going out to the water, and she swims out to the boat twice, once when they first meet and once before they perish. And both of those are kind of a cleansing to some degree, this redemption and baptism a little bit, where, you know, they say to each other, do you even remember what happened yesterday? Does the past even matter? It's like we've been born anew in this moment of our love, and all that matters is you, me, and the love that the bond that we share, not, you know, not material things, not these people that we've been interacting with, not the world outside, not the ship, not anything, but those three things: you, me, and the love. And and that's kind of a really, I mean, again, it's just kind of a wow, you're talking, Albert Lewin, you're talking about these things, you're making us, the viewer, explore these topics and make these connections, and it's all there. And I mean, I don't feel we're blowing smoke. I think that this is truly what Lewin was thinking about and writing about when he connected these two myths of Pandora and the Flying Dutchman and set them and explored those topics. That's why this film is just so layered with so much. And the way that, I mean, it really explores the concepts and the complexities of love in a way that I don't know of another film that does that.
Right. Yeah, no, it's quite something. I think it's certainly, I mean, you know, this is my first time watching it, but I certainly went back to just to rewatch a number of moments. I didn't watch it all again because you're right, it is really layered and detailed, and it's surrealist, so it makes it even harder for the audience because it's not being communicated in a conventional way. It's being communicated in like a dreamlike way. So it makes it a harder watch, but it's well worth it. I thought it was quite remarkable. And I went from sort of thinking it was good, but talking to you more, I'm thinking it's a lot better than I actually thought. I mean, I think it's a really good movie. So hopefully more and more people will discover it, you know, because before you had mentioned it, I hadn't heard of it. So, you know,
Can we do a little bit of I mean, I love to share kind of some of the things that I've discovered watching it. Maybe you know these things too, but I'd love to kind of talk through some of those, because I think it makes the viewing experience even richer when you watch it. Because like I said, I'm a champion of this film, and I love that you've gotten a lot out of it. And I do hope you go watch it again. I hope that happens every time you and I talk. I hope every time you and I talk that then you go back, and the same with you. I hope you introduce me to films and then I'll go watch them another time and get more out of them. But but there's so much, you know, I talked a little bit about at the beginning, the intent of this film and the purposefulness of it. There's so many things happening in the background, in the costumes, you know, for example, and in the names and the language. You have James Mason's character is named Hendrik van der Zee. Van der Zee translates to of the sea. So he's of the sea. Esperanza translates to hope. Which if you know the story of Pandora, the last thing in her box, Pandora's box, is hope. That's at the bottom of the, and Hendrik talks about searching for hope. In the, you know, that's what he was longing for, that he was on a ship of ghosts and his heart was searching for hope. So he ends up in the town named Hope, meeting Pandora, someone named Pandora, who was the keeper of hope. in her box. And the color yellow, one of the things about the costumes is I always thought it was odd. Why is Ava wearing yellow? Because yellow, she loved yellow roses. That was her favorite flower, but yellow's not a color that you think of being this amazing Technicolor color, really. And when it's compared to her other costumes that are green and all these other great colors of the sea, yellow's an interesting choice. And she's in it when she wears a yellow robe. In the painting of Pandora, Pandora in the painting is wearing yellow. And then when she confesses her love to James Mason, she's wearing yellow. And then at the end, when they reunite on the ship, she's wearing the same yellow robe. And yellow, in color theory, one of its meanings is hope. And so there's this hopeful quality about that's another expression of love, is the hope of love, the hope of what it can achieve and all of that. So there's just so much in this movie.
I wasn't even thinking in terms of those colors, but I imagine also, a lot of filmmakers and cinematographers, once color came around, I mean, color already existed at this point, but it was still fairly new in terms of having every movie being shot in color. It was still black and white at this point, but they were thinking, well, if we're going to use color, what can we do with it? We're not going to just shoot it. What can we do with it? What can we express with it? And that's where all these, Cardiff and I'm sure the filmmaker, the director went and looked at paintings, got their inspiration from paintings, because obviously that was all often intentional, like what the feelings that the colors will bring out. So yeah, I mean, there's so much. I mean, you could really endlessly go through this film and discover so much about all the themes that we've discussed and how the intent of everything that they were communicating with color and the painting within the film. I mean, you mentioned Pandora's box. She's holding a box in the painting too, right? So
exactly.
Wow, it really is.
Did you catch the other costumes, the elements of some of her other costumes within the film? I don't know if you noticed that.
No, I rarely, those things don't always pop out to me as much. But I mean, green was a color that you often saw. Green, yellow, there's probably more that she was wearing.
Yeah, shades of blue. She does wear black and cream tones, but when you watch it a second time, and especially the new Blu-ray, because you can really pick up these details, but the first time we meet Pandora is in the nightclub called the Two Turtles, which incidentally, Albert Lewin basically had not the MCU, not the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but the LCU, the Lewin Cinematic Universe, because if you know Dorian Gray, the little club where Angela Lansbury character sings is called the Two Turtles, and the club in this movie is called the Two Turtles. Right. And so he carries over, he's got his whole cinematic universe, and there's other things. There's a bell that rings in the tower in this film, and if you look at the bell, it says Alberto, which is Albert. And he injects himself just like Hitchcock would, he's literally on the bell ringing time, and time is a big element in this film. There's an hourglass.
That's right. Yeah.
Elements of time to denote really pending death most of the time is what the bells and the time references mean. But in that first scene where you see her is the scene where Reggie ultimately commits suicide. And the dress that she's wearing, I mean, the costumes are really stunning. They're by Beatrice Dawson. All but one of the dresses that Ava wears in the movie are by Beatrice Dawson. But when she stands up and leaves after Reggie has died, and she's kind of, doesn't really, it's like she doesn't know how to feel other than, and she probably seems, it projects like she's feeling a little bit of guilt over not feeling anything for this guy, really. She walks off, and Stephen follows her and says, "You want me to walk you home?" And she's like, "No, I'm good." And she walks off. And the dress, they show some close-ups of the dress, and it is made where it looks like it's fishnetting. And the silhouette of her in this dress, when she walks out in the moonlight, very much like a mermaid, and the bottom of it almost looked like these tentacles. And she floats like she's just swimming across. And then later she's
mermaid certainly came through with this too, like the swimming in the water.
Yes,
like
exactly. Again, that kind of deliberate intent of Lewin is really
everything
remarkable.
You could feel, you could feel it too. That I mean, Hitchcock was a filmmaker like that too. I mean, every shot, every prop, every sign, every detail, like nothing was random.
And costumes. Hitchcock was a master of using color and costume to tell something about a character. And there's another costume she's wearing where if you look at the detail, it's got little seashells. It's a blue and green. You know, she's often in kind of the colors of nature, this blue and green palette. There's another scene where she's wearing a dress that almost looks like coral. So there's all these elements of the sea, and this film is really interesting in how it uses both interior and exterior space, because often when they're inside, they're in spaces that have big windows or arches where the doors are open and you see the sea, or you see lots of times you see his yacht in the background. So he's looming, the sea is calling and looming. And
it's like a character in it.
And the camera movement evokes a lot of the sea. I love when she's on the boat the first time, and it's very subtle, but the camera just does this. Or even when he's on the ship. And after the dream and all his men are gone, just the use of sound and the movement, it's creepy. It has a creepy feel to it. Yeah, and it's not overhanded. It's not like you're doing this.
No.
But it's just enough. And you know, when the bullfighter Mario Cabré attempts to kill Hendrik, James Mason, there's a lot of use of really effective use of shadows in this film. The lighting is superb. And but in that scene, a lamp tips over and Mario kills the dog and leaves, and James Mason's on the floor, and you see this light go back, and it's again kind of movement. And again, it's just so many things you can pick up on subsequent viewings of this film.
Definitely.
It's one that's very rewarding the more you watch it. At least I find it to be.
Certainly. Well, like you were saying, it is extremely layered. So I'll have to get the Blu-ray because it's such a treat, I feel. Well, this has been such a great chat. I mean, you're really good at diving into these films and talking them out. It's really exceptional. You should start one of these on your own on a podcast.
I'm good being just have me back, Robert. We'll just talk some more.
Certainly. We'll do another one for sure. And I always ask guests, even if they've come on before, to share their social media handles or websites. So where's the best place for people to follow you?
Well, I'll start with the museum since I'm involved with them. I'm on the board, as you mentioned earlier, of the Ava Gardner Museum, and their website's avagardner.org. And the museum is on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, soon to be TikTok, if everything goes as planned.
Oh, nice.
We'll see. But that's the plan. But the museum is very active and loves to share the life and legacy of Ava Gardner. I'm very fortunate to be involved in helping develop a lot of the content that's shared on social media. So me gabbing about Ava here gets shared on social media a lot. But then me personally, my website is lorastocker.com, and my name is LoraStocker. LoraStocker.com, and I'm Lora Stocker everywhere, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I love to share Ava's stories, but also my adventures in watching classic film and exploring classic film. And you mentioned I'm a graphic designer, so I share a lot of my design work or things that inspire me with travel and film, and love talking about movies. Obviously, I love geeking out and making lots of notes. And it's always wonderful to talk to somebody who's also excited about movies. And I really love your show and what you're doing. And
thank you.
And it's great to kind of get to introduce, you asked me what film to watch we could talk about, and I recommended this, and I'm so glad you took up the challenge and watched it too, and I hope you go see it again.
Oh, I certainly will. Yeah.
Email me or text me and say, oh my God, there's this thing, there's that thing. Because it's really a rewarding movie to watch, and there's so many out there to see, so I'd love to come back and talk more.
Oh yeah, no, we certainly will. Certainly will. Well, thank you so much again for all your work and all the research you did. So this was such a great chat. So I will leave the links in the description box below for where you can follow the Ava Gardner Museum and Lora, and you can get in touch with her through those channels. So Lora, thanks again, and let's do it again.
It's a day. Just name the time.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of my YouTube channel and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found. Go to youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I also want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in supporting me over on Patreon and getting bonus content at the same time, head over to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here on my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. It's absolutely free to do so. You will see the logo floating above my head in your top left corner in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.